Let's go straight out to the West Coast where Jessica Vascellaro is standing by to tell us about Apple's denials that it was involved in ebook pricing collusion. Tell us about this.
Well, yesterday, Apple sort of had its first comment about the Justice Department suit the day before suing it, saying the allegations of price fixing simply weren't true. They defended their iBookstore as having helped to break Amazon's monopolistic grip on the ebooks industry, and the comments kind of set them up to fight it in court.
And this is kind of interesting, Jessica, because, you know, Apple's saying here we've helped break this monopoly, but when it was Amazon's monopoly, we were paying $9.99 a book, and since Apple's come to the market, we're paying $12.99 or $14.99 for some of the best sellers. Is that going to be one of the challenging arguments for Apple and the publishers in this case?
I think so, and the reason this book's pricing is so complicated is there's the price the publisher pays, or the publisher gets, and then obviously what the consumer pays. And so Apple, its pitch to publishers back when it was trying to start this bookstore in 2010 was that publishers could make more money off their titles because they could set the price, whereas Amazon, publishers charge Amazon a price, but then Amazon discounts it, of course. So Apple's saying this is good for the publishing industry. What we saw earlier this week is the Justice Department saying that model hasn't been good for consumers. But you make a great point about sort of the different interests of the publishers and consumers in this case.
Now, one of the other things that Apple's saying, Jessica, is that they're basically doing the same thing in their bookstore, in their ebook store, as they do in their app store. They allow the pricing in the app store to be by the app producers, and the same with the publishers in the bookstore. So is that going to be a good defense, or is that just going to say, okay, well, maybe we should look at the app store as well?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was interesting too. I mean, I don't think that people really care that similarity probably doesn't have much legal standing, but I think it's an interesting analogy and shows maybe some of the arguments Apple's going to make that it does use that model in the App Store. The App Store hasn't come under too much scrutiny in terms of pricing or anything like that. It's a pretty basic breakdown where app developers set their prices, get 30%, get 70%, Apple takes 30%. But I thought it was interesting and maybe gives us a window into the types of arguments they're going to use. You know, of course, earlier in the week, some of the publishers who were also sued settled. You know, one or two majors, you know, did not, and Apple, you know, is putting itself in that camp of going to fight this as well.
Do you have a sense of why it took Apple what basically was more than a day to come out and say what it thought about this?
It's a great question too. I mean, I think that you got the sense too with how this came down at the very end, with a number of publishers being named in the suit and sort of simultaneously the Justice Department announcing a settlement with some of those publishers, that all of this came down last minute. Imagine that there were a number of discussions about what to do. I mean, Apple could easily drop a few clauses in its pricing policy and just keep iBooks up and running and sort of make this go away. So I think there's a lot of back and forth. I imagine there'll continue to be. I mean, when you come out with a statement like this, you're putting your position out there in the market. But I think there'll be a ton of conversations between publishers and Apple, publishers and the government. An interesting point too is there's been a similar investigation in Europe into ebook pricing, and around the time that this came out, Apple was actually among the group that proposed settling that investigation over there. So that's one question we still have, why Apple appears to be willing to settle in Europe, but is saying this in the US.
Oh, well, it's certainly got the money to fight as long as it wants to. It's certainly cash for lawyers. Anyway, we'll leave that story there.